are you doing?
This. I'm a complete asshole. I'm selfish, I'm self-absorbed, and I suck pretty much all of the time.
Hey guys, so I have a confession to make. I'm kind of obsessed with Shane Dawson. I've been following his work for a really long time. I was there for his food tasting videos, I used to listen to his podcasts when I went on walks around my neighborhood. His sketch comedy days were a bit before I got on board, but I still knew about him back then. Even now, long after I probably should be obsessed with Shane Dawson, I'm still lurking in the background. And I've learned something about myself in all of this. I've learned that no matter how many scandals Shane Dawson goes through, no matter how many compilations people make showcasing his bad behavior, I can't bring myself to look away. You know, even before Shane Dawson was cancelled, I always felt like there was something unbelievable about him. Like there was this contradiction to his personality. I didn't really know how to explain it back then, but I guess it had something to do with the fact that Shane could be so mean and vulgar in his YouTube videos, and then somehow turn around and be sensitive and kind. In Shane's early days, it wasn't uncommon for him to play a character who participates in bestiality, or another character who says multiple racial slurs, and then somehow end the video with a message about being nice to people.
So the point of my video is yes, sometimes it's hard to be a good person, and it's a lot easier to just not give. But remember, saying one nice thing to somebody or doing one favor can change somebody's whole day, and that's pretty awesome.
Or how about the time where Shane makes fun of someone's music preferences?
Play Britney Spears. Stop! Yo, man, I don't know how that got in there, man. It's crazy. Right.
But then at the end, he reminds everyone to stay true to themselves.
But there's one temptation that people always seem to fall for, and that's a temptation to change yourself for other people's acceptance. And I know it's hard to turn down, but just remember, if you want to be successful and you want to be happy in life, you got to stay true to you.
We can see this discrepancy about Shane Dawson in different aspects of his content. Sometimes Shane would upload a video like this, and then the very next day he would upload a video like this. Honestly, scrolling back through Shane's upload feed is wild. It's just this chaotic mix of silly life hack videos, sandwiched in between dark conspiracy videos, sandwiched in between conversational videos, and also literal sandwiches. And it's all treated with the same shallow level of care. I mean, it's one thing to be serious every once in a while, but there's just something about putting all of these videos into the same boat that's just unsettling. Also, Shane Dawson goes way too far with his clickbait. He has this one video called "We Adopted a Baby," and the thumbnail looks pretty serious, right? They're both smiling, Shane's not making a crazy face. But of course, this thumbnail is a lie. They don't actually adopt a baby, they like rent one for a day or something. There are so many examples of this. Shane just lying in his thumbnails. Not exaggerating, but straight up lying. As recently as 7 months ago, Shane made a video where he and Rylan talk about getting married. Of course, they don't actually get married, but that didn't stop Shane from calling the video "our wedding" and photoshopping a tuxedo onto himself. It's little decisions like these that have made Shane seem untrustworthy over the years, at least to me. Like he just shouldn't be taken seriously as an entertainer and his content just doesn't have any value. But like it or not, millions of people still pay attention to Shane Dawson. He hasn't fallen to the wayside like a Toby Turner or an Onision or other problematic characters of his time. So the question I want to ask today is why? Why is Shane Dawson still so popular? And why is it that despite all the genres Shane dips his toe into, it all sort of feels the same? Well, in order to answer these questions, we must go back to the time when Shane Dawson tried something different. Not Cool is Shane Dawson's 2014 movie which he both directed and starred in. It's about a group of college kids who come back to their hometown for Thanksgiving break. Shane Dawson plays Scott, an aspiring photographer who was a jock in high school but kind of a loser in college. So when he comes back to his hometown, he doesn't really know what to do with himself.
I hate college. I fucking hate it.
Scott becomes romantically involved with Tori, the shy girl from his high school whom he used to bully.
I have some huge news! Oh, what, my train crashed and I'm actually in hell right now?
And it seems like Tori is not very willing to forgive Scott for all of the bad things he's done.
Why are you so mean?
I'm mean? Wow, that's a double standard. I recall it going a little bit differently in high school.
I think Not Cool is worth talking about when it comes to Shane Dawson because it's a very revealing project for him. It's one of the only things he's ever done where he doesn't have 100% creative control. There were so many producers, investors, and cameramen who were monitoring his progress. Yes, that's right, Not Cool was made as part of a competition reality show called The Chair, in which two filmmakers, one of them being Shane Dawson, take the same base script and make their own totally separate movies out of it, and they compete to see which movie is the best. So that's another thing. The script for Not Cool was written by someone else. Shane had input on the script, of course, but his usual brand of trashy humor and self-indulgence suddenly feels very out of place in the midst of an actual Hollywood story. Sometimes Not Cool feels like this heartfelt drama about growing up and becoming more mature, and other times it's this offensive juvenile comedy where Shane sticks a cucumber in his pants and we're all expected to laugh. And I think it's in this contrast of two different worlds where we can really learn a lot about Shane Dawson and how he sees himself. So first, let's talk about what Not Cool does right, because believe it or not, there are things in Not Cool in which it does right. Not Cool is certainly a very ambitious movie, and we can see this in the brief times where it seems to be trying to teach us something. Pretty much every character in Not Cool is addicted to drugs or sex or technology or a combination of all three. The opening scene illustrates this pretty well. The camera dollies through this house party and we see all these teenagers who are having sex, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, and perhaps most importantly, they're all lying about what they're doing on social media. We also have the character of Scott, who obsesses over his phone as a way to repair all of his romantic relationships.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad there's an app that can make stalking more efficient.
I'm not stalking. Okay, I'm merely using technology to help me locate someone who doesn't want to talk to me at the moment. Which is stalking.
In the beginning of the movie, he's trying to reach his ex-girlfriend Heather, but she's not responding, so he's frustrated. And then towards the end of the movie, we have a scene that mirrors the first one, except now Scott is trying to reach his new love interest, Tori. Both times, he doesn't get a response. It's only when Scott confronts Tori in person that their relationship progresses. And there's an earlier scene where Scott is looking at an app that's tracking the location of Heather. He's too engrossed in the app, he's not looking where he's going, and he gets hit by a car. Now, this might seem like an unfair thing to bring up, like a character getting hit by a car while using technology doesn't necessarily mean that the movie hates technology, but there's also a scene where Tori is filming a drunk girl at a party, and the drunk girl throws up on her. Now, the phone is not mentioned by either character, and the scene would basically play out the same way if the phone wasn't there and they were just talking, but they specifically had Tori holding a phone and filming this person. So I'm wondering if this is like a Friday the 13th thing where all of the bad things that happen to these characters are somehow related to technology. Meanwhile, Tori herself has a lot of trauma related to technology. In high school, people would bully her on social media, commenting Tori the Hoary on her posts, one of these people being Scott.
Tori the Hoary?
And we're back.
In fact, Scott is the one who came up with the nickname Tori the Hoary.
Oh yeah, I came up with that name.
This is one of the things that the movie conveniently forgets about during the third act, but we'll come back to this. The character of Heather actually has it pretty bad when it comes to drugs and sex. You see, there's this running gag in the movie where people create these new kinds of drugs by combining already existing kinds of drugs.
Ethel's that new hybrid drug everybody's been blah-blahing about. It's Molly mixed with old people medicine. It's supposed to be totes cray.
At the climax of the movie, Heather is high on this new drug called Rihanna, which is probably the most extreme out of all the drugs we've heard about before. And then she assaults Scott as a way to get back together with him. And it's implied that the reason she was so aggressive is because she was high on this new drug.
What's with all the violence?
Sorry, I'm on Rihanna. It's Molly mixed with steroids and adrenaline.
Also, there's another scene involving Heather that's pretty interesting. In the beginning of the movie, Heather is pleasuring Scott in a public bathroom, yes, I know, and the writer of the movie, Dan Topher, has a cameo where he says this.
What the hell is wrong with these people?
I don't know how relevant this is to the movie's overall message, but it's just something I found. Okay, let's move away from things that'll probably get this video flagged and back onto the technology front. We have the character of Joel, a nervous guy who's trying to get with his high school crush, Janie.
Janie, is that you?
Joel, what are you doing here?
Nothing much, just visiting the old stomping ground.
Joel manages to spend some time with Janie, and he does all sorts of morally questionable things to impress her. He tells her he has a blog where he writes about all of his sexual exploits, which isn't true. He gives her the answer key to the final exam that she's studying for, and he stalks her on social media to find out all of her favorite things so he can say that they are his favorite things too. This falls apart though when Janie figures out that the only reason Joel could know all these things is if he stalked her on social media.
You Facebook stalked me.
What?
Janie tells Joel that her behavior on social media isn't an accurate representation of her.
I don't like half the stuff I like.
It's just easier to go along with everybody.
Joel and Janie's relationship had been rocky up until this point, but they have a genuine moment when they go to the vinyl vault and Janie asks Joel to slow dance with her, a real authentic experience complete without any technology, and Joel didn't plan for it. Janie gets cold feet though after they have their first kiss, and the two end up just being friends, showing Joel that sex isn't everything.
You like me for who I am. I didn't want to throw that all away by having meaningless sex.
Except not really. But we'll get back to this. Joel and Janie's relationship is the best part of the movie in my opinion, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Shane Dawson is not in it. Now, this dancing scene in the vinyl vault is actually part of another way that the movie illustrates its theme. There are 3 scenes in which our characters dance, and in each subsequent scene, our characters become more comfortable and happy while doing it, showcasing how much they've changed in the story. The first one is between Scott and Tori. They're in a dance competition against each other, and they're also arguing about their relationship.
Maybe I don't want a partner who's merely average size, somewhat herky-jerky, and pays nowhere close to the attention to detail that one would expect from an aspiring photographer.
Notice how there's a TV in front of them, a piece of technology. The second scene is the Joel and Janie one in the vinyl vault. They are fairly acquainted with each other at this point, but Janie gets cold feet and runs away. And the last dancing scene is with Scott and Tori again. They're both happy, there's not a phone in sight, and just to make it clear that they've completed their character arcs, they're doing the same dance routine to the same song that they were in the beginning. Okay, so based on everything we've talked about so far, it seems like what the movie is trying to teach us is that sex, drugs, social media, and technology in general are bad. They compel us to be dishonest with each other, ignorant of other people's needs, and perhaps most importantly, they take us away from what matters most in life, the real authentic experiences we have with the people we love. However, I want to add a slight caveat to this theme, because there are times in the movie where our characters are able to understand each other while having sex. Like with Scott and Tori. There are 2 scenes in the movie in which Scott and Tori have sex, and both times it's played completely sincere. It's also specifically stated that they are practicing safe sex, so that's great. It's a very conservative theme in Not Cool if you think about it. Spend less time on social media and technology as a whole, don't do drugs, and you can have sex, but only if you do it safely and it's with someone you trust. It's a good theme and it's solid execution. Unfortunately, these are only the things in Not Cool that make sense. There's an entire mountain of confusion that we haven't even gotten to yet. For instance, let me just wet your palate a little bit. A big part about Not Cool is that it takes place during Thanksgiving. And honestly, that's a smart move on the writer's part because Thanksgiving is generally considered to be a good thing. Like, aside from all of the baggage that comes with Thanksgiving, everybody agrees that it's a time for us to spend with our loved ones, and to be grateful and happy about our lives. You could say that Thanksgiving is the strongest remaining pillar of conservatism. And so, if you're a writer trying to make a conservative movie, this is good news, because you can take this good thing that everybody agrees with, and contrast it against all this deviant behavior, so the answer between the two becomes more clear. But Not Cool doesn't really do that. It turns out that there's plenty of deviancy in Thanksgiving.
At least we don't have to sit with crazy Aunt Flo.
Did I ever tell you about the time I got abducted by aliens?
Gil, you should try my pie.
Today, you can consider me an alcoholic father.
Or can you get the door?
I'm real nice when I'm drunk.
According to what we talked about before, Thanksgiving should be a safe space where people can be themselves away from the modern world and all of its vices. Tori even says that her parents don't allow phones at the dinner table.
I needed to talk to you and you weren't answering your phone.
Yeah, it's Thanksgiving and my mom makes us put our phones and beepers in a basket before we sit down to the table.
So they went that far, but instead of being model characters, the families are just as obnoxious as the teenagers. Scott and Janie get stuck at the kids' table, Tori chugs a glass of wine, Tori's mom is promiscuous.
You have to kiss me.
I want to play!
And Scott's aunt is a cartoon of a crazy person.
The real question is, how did we get here?
It doesn't make sense, and I can't help but think that this is Shane Dawson's doing. These devious family characters are totally in line with the kinds of characters that Shane likes to write, so he put them in the movie despite it not really making sense. And believe me, it gets so much worse than that. Like, remember Joel and Janie, how their story ends with them just being friends, and Joel learns that there's more to life than being a horny weirdo? Well, the story doesn't actually end there. You see, Joel admits to Janie that he's a virgin, and Janie feels bad for him, so she sets him up with her group of not very intelligent, promiscuous friends.
I was thinking I'd get you laid. Friends don't let friends stay virgins, and I happen to know a trio of overly promiscuous, easily impressionable ladies.
And the very last time we see Joel, he is being intimate with all four of them at once. Now, this scene is a terrible ending for Joel. It's disgusting, and I hate it for so many reasons. The main reason is that it seems to imply that you should not love the people who you have sex with, and in fact, they should be beneath you. Quite the opposite from what some parts of the movie have led us to believe. You see, while Joel is pursuing Janie, he says under his breath that he loves her.
Bye. Love you so much.
And this is a sweet moment, but he also says many times that he wants to hook up with her. And it's implied that this is his ultimate goal.
I don't go back to Cornell until Sunday, so...
And I thought you were actually gonna help me study.
It seems like Joel doesn't even understand that there's a difference between love and sex. So the climactic scene in the vinyl vault where Janie tells Joel she enjoys his company but she doesn't want to be his sexual partner is important because it separates the two things in Joel's mind. He has his love with Janie, but then the sex part is diverted onto these four women, who are described as overly promiscuous and easily impressionable, as if Joel is taking advantage of them. It's just really gross. The R slur is used to describe one of these women, and you know, I'm not even saying here that Joel has to end the movie without having sex. In fact, I can think of a few ways to do do this that aren't problematic? What if, at this final party, Joel meets another woman from his high school who, it turns out, had a huge crush on him the whole time? Or you could set him up with Heather. Heather has the unfortunate problem of wanting to hook up with someone who doesn't reciprocate her feelings, which is basically Joel's problem. So you could have the two horn dogs of the movie hook up with each other and unleash all of their frustrations onto each other. This option also has the potential to be very funny, which is what the original scene was going for. So it's not like they had to do what they did because it was the only comedic option. But do you know what both of my suggestions have that the movie's ending doesn't have? Joel's sexual partners would have agency. They would be choosing to be there. But these four women are not doing that. Janie agrees that she is pimping them out to Joel.
Overly promiscuous, easily impressionable ladies.
You're just gonna pimp them out? Really?
Yes.
What kind of message is that? And honestly, why would Janie even do this? I mean, yes, she is considered to be one of the popular girls, but she's sort of a neutral party. And she never does anything mean enough before this that would suggest she's capable of pimping out her friends. It makes no sense. And if you're wondering why this horrible stuff is in the movie, well, I think we have a pretty good answer right in front of us. Shane Dawson is playing the character who is making out with Joel here. I don't think Drew Monson, the actor who plays Joel, was underage when this movie was made, but it's still pretty sketchy because Shane Dawson is the director of the movie, and he has this scene where he makes out with his young co-star. And when you factor in all of the supposed emotional abuse that Shane has done to Drew over the years, it's just not a good thing. Okay, so now we're getting into the really bad stuff, which is Not Cool's thesis statement, Scott and Tori's characters, and their whole train wreck of a relationship. Believe it or not, Not Cool gets pretty philosophical in the very last minute of its runtime. It actually has a spoken thesis statement, and it's a total mess. Right now, I'm just going to paraphrase the entirety of Tori's final narration because there's a song that plays over it. The world does not need to know how I feel every second of every day. Call me crazy, but as soon as we comment on the present, we lose it forever. And the present is where things happen. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's glorious. But it's always the place to be, because life happens in the present. If you're living with one foot in the past, you're missing a foot. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Kill the past? Somebody's got a lawsuit on their hands. All jokes aside, I don't think this final monologue is very good. I don't think it's a good conclusion to what this movie has been about. But before I get into it, I just want to point out the sleaziness of having Tori be the one to deliver this final monologue. Out of all the characters, she's probably the one who's the least addicted to social media.
Sorry, but the world does not need to know how I feel every second of every day.
Like, that's not really what her story is about, but we'll get to that in a bit. This final monologue is so infuriating to me because the more you think about it, the less it makes sense. It egregiously misrepresents what I think the theme of the movie is, which is sex, drugs, social media, and technology are bad. It says nothing about sex or drugs, and what it says about social media is straight up confusing. Let's start with the first line. The world does not need to know how I feel every second of every day. Okay, this line is pretty obviously about social media. Tori is scrolling through social media and then she pauses and then exits out of the app and then this voiceover line happens. And it's a pretty agreeable take on social media too. Don't spend all of your time on social media. Everything in moderation. That's pretty good. But it all goes off the rails in the very next line. As soon as we comment on the present, we lose it forever. Okay, what does this line even mean? Sure, commenting on the present might be something that we do on social media here in the real world, share our opinions about current events and stuff like that, but the characters in the movie don't really care about this stuff. Like, there's no mob of SJWs running around accusing people of doing bad things. The social media that's depicted in Not Cool is very individualized.
Needless to say, high school sucked.
no one really does anything on it that could be considered commenting on the present. So why is this line here? It could be referring to the opening scene where all of the characters are doing vulgar things and tweeting about doing something different, but they aren't so much commenting on the present here as they are manufacturing a false one, which is interesting in its own right, like what Janie does with her social media profile, but it's not really the same thing. You could say that the commenting on the present line doesn't refer to social media at all, and instead it refers to overthinking things. You know, don't overthink things, just live life in the present. Don't worry about your life too much because then it'll pass you by. And I gotta say, this interpretation is probably what the movie was going for. It's basically what Joel has to learn in the movie. Joel wants to get with his high school crush, but he's too meticulous with his efforts. He becomes closer with Janie when he gives up control and lives in the moment. Scott is also described as being too regimented.
You're like so regimented. I mean, everything about you has to be like so perfect, or you like freak out. So what I'm gonna do is just loosen you up a little bit.
So it seems like both Joel and Scott could benefit from a message of don't worry too much about life. But there's one thing holding this back. Scott admits that he is flunking out of college.
I'm failing every class. I'm failing yoga. How do you fail yoga?
And Janie also has trouble with school, so the message of the movie can't really be to loosen up. In fact, I think we've kind of exposed a contradiction in the movie here. Usually people who are described as being too regimented aren't also flunking out of college. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that this final line is just not very applicable to Not Cool. In fact, I think it says more about the person who made Not Cool than Not Cool itself. As soon as we comment on the present, we lose it forever. If you have one foot in the past, you're missing a foot. Shane Dawson is talking about his fans here, the people who are mad at him for making offensive content. Shane would really benefit from us forgetting about the past, so he makes it the moral lesson of his movie, the very last thing we hear before the credits. But what baffles me is that Shane doesn't even do the work to make it believable. Like, what are Scott and Tori doing in this scene?
But it's always the place to be, because life happens in the present.
They are reminiscing about the past, literally at the same time that the voiceover is saying that it's bad to reminisce about the past. It would have been better if for the last scene of the movie we see our two main characters back at their respective colleges making new authentic experiences for themselves. But instead, they are literally sitting down and staring at their screens. What has changed? Scott needs to find a new purpose at college. We need to see that from him. He spent the entire movie talking about how much he hated college and how much he was flunking out of all of his classes. The very last thing that Scott does in the movie is send Tori a text message that says, "See you this Christmas." This Christmas? That's only like a month away. How is that any meaningful change for the character? He's still in the same boat he was at the beginning of the movie, sending text messages to his long-distance girlfriend. And Scott is also still a photographer at the end of the movie, and that's a whole nother can of worms. You see, all throughout Not Cool, there are little nuggets of evidence that suggest that Scott's photography is a bad thing that he should stop doing. First of all, Scott took this unflattering photo of Tori in high school, which was a major source of her trauma.
Needless to say, high school sucked.
And second of all, the way Scott describes his work is pretty much the same thing as commenting on the present.
You see how that old couple is sitting perfectly right between that trash can and that stained glass window and that fountain? It's kind of like beauty meets its opposite.
You know, the thing that we all know that the movie does not want us to do. But there's another important thing about Scott's photography, and it's that when Tori learns that Scott has been taking these photos, she decides that Scott has actually become a huge dork since high school has ended.
I didn't sleep with the cool guy. I slept with the formerly cool guy who's actually a big frickin' dork.
And now, Tori needs to teach Scott how to become cool again.
What are you doing later?
I don't know. Why?
Because we're hanging out.
This interaction basically kicks off the whole second act where Scott and Tori do fun things together around the town. But the point is, in this scene, Scott's photography is explicitly linked with his inability to move on after high school, and it's framed as a problem he needs to fix. So you'd think that Scott would eventually accept his bad habit and reach some sort of conclusion about it, right? Well, no, that's not what happens, and what we get instead is incredibly strange and somewhat disrespectful to Tori's character. Okay, buckle up because this next section is going to be a doozy. So there's a scene towards the end of the movie where Scott and Tori go back to their old high school gym. Tori had given Scott a weed brownie earlier in the day, but now she reveals that the weed brownie was fake.
I just gave you a plain old brownie. There was no weed in it.
And we get this wonderful moment where Shane pretends to not know what the placebo effect is.
You had this preconceived notion of how you would respond to the brownie.
Anyway, Tori goes on to explain that the reason she gave Scott a fake weed brownie without telling him was to punish him for him taking that unflattering photo of her back in high school.
See the natural composition?
No, f your composition. That was my life that you were photographing. I mean, do you have any idea when that was taken?
And she reveals that the reason she was so upset that night was because the man who took her virginity told her that he didn't want to be seen in public with her, and he basically broke up with her. But Scott doesn't apologize for taking the unflattering photo of Tori. Instead, he says he didn't realize it upset her so much.
I didn't know.
Yeah, no, nobody knew, but you still went and you posted the picture like it's just no big deal. Because you have absolutely no idea what it's like to be a loser.
And finally, Scott confesses that even though he seemed like such a cool guy in high school, he's actually a big loser. And that's supposed to excuse everything.
I want no secret. This is the first time on a Friday I've actually done anything. In like months.
Okay, I know that was a lot of information, but basically this scene is just one big retcon of the entire Scott and Tori storyline so far. And it's all for the purpose of making Scott, and by extension Shane Dawson, look as squeaky clean as possible. First of all, Scott bullied Tori in high school. He bullies her at the beginning of this movie.
Tori the Hoary?
And we're back.
Wow. You look kind of good now. You know, that nickname might not even be that ironic anymore.
So the fact that he doesn't consider the unflattering photo he took of her to be offensive is just wrong. It's a plot hole.
It's actually one of my favorite shots. I love the way the light hits your hair. See the natural composition?
This scene just works to remove all of the fault from Scott and places it all onto Tori's own insecurity. Like Tori's trauma about the picture was just in her head the whole time. Maybe that's why they gave her that horrendous monologue at the end. As if it's her fault Scott took the picture in the first place, and it's her fault that she was cyberbullied. And that's honestly horrible. Tori is a victim of trauma. She's not to blame for any of this. But the third act of this movie pretends like she is. Okay, this is something that I didn't even notice until I started editing the video, but the reveal that Scott is not cool, so to speak, happens twice. Once in this scene and then once in this scene. And in the first time, Tori is the one who calls Scott out on it. But then in this scene, they act like she still thinks he's popular, and Scott is the one who knows that he's not cool. I mean, it's so weird. Like, why would they change it like this? Like, why would Tori still think that Scott is popular? Like, if she thinks that, then what was the point of the last 20 minutes of the movie? It's also likely why they had Tori give Scott a fake weed brownie as revenge for him taking the photo. The weed brownie is such a weird and nonsensical thing, but if you think about it, it's the best way to mask any of the blame that Scott might have for this photo. There's a version of this scene where Tori does something like take a mean photo of Scott as revenge, but that would only serve to highlight what Scott did, and when he claims later that he meant no harm, it would just be that much more unbelievable. The weed brownie, on the other hand, has nothing to do with anything, So the audience can just go, oh, well, Scott didn't give Tori a fake weed brownie in high school, so he's good. It's weird, you know? It's kind of like anti-storytelling. Instead of making things clear for the audience, let's try and make them as confusing as possible, because that's the only way we can protect Scott's character, and by extension, Shane's ego. This scene also does a huge retcon to Tori's sexual history. In the beginning of the movie, Tori says this.
That nickname was meant to be ironic, by the way. Although, I did have sex with a zucchini once, so I guess that was kind of...
She was a virgin all throughout high school. Okay, but this scene changes that.
The night that from Murraysville, who took my virginity.
Apparently, she did lose her virginity in high school. Now, Tori does say that she didn't tell anyone about this, but isn't that supposed to be for the characters in the movie? Tori was talking to the audience at the beginning. Isn't she supposed to tell the truth then? And you could say that she was being an unreliable narrator here, but honestly, I just don't give the movie that much credit. I truly think that this is a plot hole. They retroactively made Tori lose her virginity in high school, so Scott doesn't have to apologize here. But you know what? This does fit surprisingly well with our conservative theme. All of a sudden, Tori's abrasive personality and her goth clothing are not because she was cyberbullied in high school and now she has a difficult time trusting people, but because she had premarital sex. And in order to fix herself, Tori needs to get married. And that's what she's heading towards at the end of the movie. In just one scene, Scott goes from being the cause of Tori's problems to being the solution, and he doesn't have to do anything. Honestly, it's kind of brilliant in a weird way. But honestly, what is this weird 1950s Hays Code nonsense? Not Cool is a movie with a homeless person showing his genitals, a couple having sex in a public bathroom, and two separate jokes about someone's flatulence being loud.
It's gonna be so loud.
Plug your ears.
What are you
It's
doing?
gonna be loud.
It has no right to be this pious. But that's just the insanity of Not Cool. It seems to me that Shane identified with the character of Scott, and he wanted to cast himself as Scott. But there was just one problem. Scott is kind of a jerk. He has some growing up to do. And this made Shane uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to not cast himself as Scott, so Shane made some compromises. When it came time for Scott to apologize, that apology was transformed into ignorance and a confession that Scott is actually a loser. Of course, this is ridiculously petty. Shane should not have to worry about damaging his reputation by playing a jerk. No one is mad at James Earl Jones for playing Darth Vader. It's called acting. Scott is a fictional character, but I don't think Shane saw it that way. And this brings us to what is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of Not Cool incompetence, the most obvious Shane Dawson propaganda that this movie shows us. And that is this scene right here. It's the big climactic scene of the movie. Scott is apologizing to his love interest for being such a jerk, and what does he do? He shaves off his hair, probably leaving a big mess for her family to clean up.
I'm sorry about the prom picture. And I'm sorry about Heather. And I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like I was better than you.
Honestly, I could talk about this scene for hours. It's just so unhinged, and I don't think you can find anything like it in any other movie. This scene is such a brutal metaphor for what the entire movie really is. Because I could sit here and explain why it actually does make sense for Scott to shave off his hair here. Multiple characters talk about it as if it's a symbol for his selfishness.
The depth of your selfishness is astonishing. How dare you come to me for advice? You know how many times I've tried talking to you, but you were too busy for me? Too busy with your hair, your photography, or Heather, whatever was consuming you at the time?
But in reality, we don't need any of that, because Shane Dawson himself said that he wanted to shave off his hair.
Everybody in my personal life couldn't have been happier that I shaved my head. Everybody hated my hair. Everybody. My family, my girlfriend, my producer and partner, everybody in my life. Because they knew how much I hated it. So when I finally got to shave it, I mean, it was like the happiest day I've ever had.
So all of the movie's justification for why this happens is just secondary to what Shane's true motive was. In fact, everything we've talked about so far can be explained by the simple fact that Not Cool was just one big wish fulfillment project for Shane. Think about it. Scott is a photographer who did some things in the past that could be considered offensive. But it turns out that he was just a sweet boy the entire time, and the people who were offended by his actions are just insecure losers who eventually learn the errors of their ways.
I didn't know.
Yeah, no, nobody knew, but you still went and you posted the picture like it's just no big deal, because you have absolutely no idea what it's like to be a loser.
Scott also falls in love with a girl who coincidentally has the same last name as a girl from Shane's old high school. Yes, this is true, and I'm not going to say exactly how I know this because I don't want to dox this person, but let's just say that when you become as familiar with Shane's content as I have, it becomes pretty obvious. Not Cool is a movie where Shane apologizes, and everyone accepts his apology. But he didn't really need to apologize because he didn't do anything wrong in the first place. But you know what? Who cares if Scott is a jerk? Because everyone in this movie is a jerk. Absolutely everyone, including the people who should be more responsible. And including Tori herself.
Come on, Scott. The internet wants to see you get kicked in the balls really bad.
This is the universe required to make Shane Dawson seem like a nice guy. This is why the message about technology and social media is so muddled. Because Shane makes a living on social media. He makes a living on deviancy. So of course he's not going to star in a movie that denounces these things, but he's also not going to write his own script because Not Cool was made as part of a competition reality show where the challenge of adapting someone else's script is built into the premise. I just can't believe that this is how Shane's directorial debut turned out. The movie that Shane claimed was going to be his big break.
I'm ready to do a movie. I'm ready to do something bigger than just the internet. You know, I've wanted to make movies my whole life.
In this monologue that Shane gives at the beginning of The Chair, he acts as if he's ready to move on from his YouTube content. But really, what he ends up making is no different than his YouTube content. Not Cool is offensive, self-indulgent, and ultimately meaningless. One of the first things you notice when you watch The Chair is just the sheer difference in how our two competitors act. A.M. Lucas is cautious. She makes no promises about the quality of her art, and she's nervous in front of the camera.
Every now and then I feel self-conscious, but then I'm just like, you're filming me. And then it's okay, you know what I mean? Like, I try to just be honest with everybody around me.
Watching her storyline can sometimes feel a little strange, as she often clashes with the camera crew and asks us to look away.
How do you guys feel about these cameras? If you want the cameras gone, we can talk about that.
Yeah, I would think maybe just for the first few times.
Totally understand. Yeah, I just have to ask Anthony. They hate this.
Meanwhile, Shane Dawson is confident. He doesn't seem fazed by the cameras at all. In fact, he invites us in.
I'm gonna have sex with Jeremy.
And he expresses his desire for us to enjoy his movie.
I think a lot of you guys watching the show are actually gonna like my movie, and I think you're gonna be surprised. I hope you're gonna be surprised.
At the beginning of this video, I asked, why is Shane Dawson so popular? And I think for a lot of people, both content creators and content consumers alike, Shane Dawson represents a sort of uncomfortable truth about this space. A question that I often ask myself is, what is my purpose for being on this website? What is required of me? And I think the professional answer to that question is to make art, to produce something of intrinsic value to give to your audience. This is a very noble answer. It's idealistic. And it's also comforting. Because if YouTube is just a transaction, then that means that someone like me can make it. All I have to do is find the right words. But the very existence of Shane Dawson proves that that's not the case. Everything that Shane Dawson has ever made is hopelessly about him. His personality, his interests, his desires and insecurities. And it's almost shocking how little else there is.
I heard a few years ago that Chuck E. Cheese actually takes that leftover pizza and serves it again. It's almost every picture you find of Chuck E. Cheese pizza, and nobody's talking about it. So I noticed this when I was like 8 years old or something, and I was just like, wait a minute, how come all the pieces are different?
Shane Dawson does this, and he is still wildly successful. So it seems like the only thing that's required to make it on this website is to reproduce, to increase your own reputation, to broadcast yourself. And to some people, that's terrifying, because they believe that yourself is not something that you can easily control. But to others, that's comforting. What Shane Dawson ultimately says to the world is this: it doesn't matter that my content is offensive, juvenile, contradictory, and just generally low effort. The only thing that matters is that I made it. And isn't that a beautiful thing?